Panspermia is the hypothesis that life started on some other planet well before Earth even existed, and then advanced for a while on that other planet, and then some rock smashed into that planet and knocked another rock with life off that planet. The life stayed deep inside the rock, and it drifted for a really long time, but somehow part of it didn't die, such that when it landed on some other planet later on, the life could continue. And that planet could have been ours. So the usual reason to think of this as an unlikely hypothesis is the idea that it's just really hard for life to last on a rock for a long time. And if it's a short time, then it's really hard for the two planets to be close enough so that a rock one will get to the other one. And I agree that that's kind of hard. However, there's some considerations in the other direction, which are that it's really hard for life to arrive on a planet like ours right from scratch and then go through all the steps to get to where we are before the window for life on a planet like ours ends. That's also really hard. And in fact, the idea is that the reason why the universe looks so empty is that life starts down that path in a lot of places, but it just can't get to the end by the deadline like it got here. We got really lucky on this planet for life to go through all these steps and get to where we are at this very early date. And then if there was life on a previous planet, then that roughly doubles the time during which life could have had to do all these hard steps. And the usual statistical model is that the chance of something happening by a time goes as the number of hard steps raised to the power, it goes as time raised to the number of hard steps power. So looking at timing on Earth roughly guesses, 6 hard steps, in which case time, the chance was time to the 6th power. And if it was only 6 steps, then if we add twice as much time, then we get to increase the probability of the hypothesis by 2 to the 6th, which is, 32. But if in fact there were 6 hard steps on our planet and also 6 steps on the prior one, now we're raising it to 2 to the 12, which is more like 4,000. And so the hypothesis that there was panspermia is raised by this chance of 2 to the 4,000, roughly 4,000, relative to the hypothesis that it all happened all in this planet. So that's a factor that leans you more in the direction of panspermia.
So you just have more time to develop on those other planets,
and you because need a lot of time. Time is really crucial to being able to do all these hard steps that happen here. A weaker point is just that the chance of panspermia would be proportional to the number of planets in our stellar nursery. That is, most likely panspermia would have seeded our whole stellar nursery, the whole thing, because there would be lots of rocks flying back and forth, would be dense. And so the bigger our stellar nursery was, the bigger that chance. And it turns out from some other data, our stellar nursery was really big, max size. So that's support for the hypothesis that it happened. It's weak support, but it is support. And so that raises also the chance. If there's 10,000 stars in a nursery, then the chance of panspermia happening is the chance of this transfer to the nursery times the number of stars in the nursery you could seed. And so now we're getting another factor of 10,000 favoring the hypothesis. So we're building up factors favoring the panspermia hypothesis. And another factor would be, you might consider it weak, if UFOs are aliens, then the best story I can come up with is that they are our panspermia siblings, in which case there would have to be panspermia for us to have such siblings. So the more you believe UFOs really are some sort of alien, then the more you, I think, got to favor panspermia.
We'll get into UFOs. To sort of understand the story so far, though, if panspermia is more likely for origins of life, and life, say, here on Earth, because you could have that life develop for much longer in some other part of the galaxy, because our sun is a bit more relatively recent, and they could have had billions of years elsewhere. And you add to that there are also many planets and stars in our sort of cluster, so panspermia could have had a better chance of getting somewhere. Is that right? It could have.
So the universe is now 14 billion years old. Our planet is roughly 4.5 billion years old. So that means, according to the usual story, there was 10 billion years of universe history before our planet shows up. Now, the peak of star formation, therefore planet formation, was roughly 4 billion years after the beginning. So in the usual story, there were most of the planets and stars forming and a lot of stuff happening. Most of the stuff that happens in the first 10 billion years. And our story doesn't include any of that. And then our story starts 4 billion years ago, and then life evolves on our planet. Whereas the alternative panspermia theory is using that prior history a lot more, right? It's saying, no, it's important stuff in our history was happening back then. And there's also a factor in that, like, just more planets and stars were forming way back then. So that also has to add a boost to the hypothesis that, important stuff happened back then.
It's interesting because that you're thinking of likelihood and priors, it kind of pervades a lot of your thinking on this area and others. So it's not, even though panspermia, it sounds like kind of a wild idea. Actually, it's more just, it just helps you incorporate sort of more of it. It just makes it seem more likely. I wonder, you talk about, so now that we have panspermia in our mind, I was wondering if you could talk about UFOs and why you think that, if we think UFOs are aliens, if that's plausible, like why panspermia is a helpful way to think about how they came about.
Right. So to face it straight off, life would just be better, easier to understand from our initial point of view if UFOs didn't exist, right? Once you see them, you go, what the hell? That's weird. And you're stuck in a position of finding a way to explain them. There's 4 major categories of explanations, I'd say. There's just delusions and mistakes, hallucinations, basically, as one category. There's hoaxes, purposely, trying to fool people and lie. There's some secret organization that's making real stuff that has these amazing capabilities, or there's some secret distant organization that's doing it. And that last one would be the aliens hypothesis. So you don't really have much more than these 4 categories. And so for each one, you have to do this Bayesian game of asking, for each category of explanation, how plausible would you think that would be? And trying to come up with the most plausible story that would fit the data we have. And ask, if this were true, how plausible would it be to see this sort of thing? And we got to do that for each of the categories. And so the obvious one, obviously hallucinations and mistakes happen all the time. So the prior is really high on that. The question is just, can that explain? And obviously it can explain a lot. I guess we roughly have 100,000 UFO reports worldwide that are officially written up, and a lot more sightings that weren't written up. So clearly a lot of those could be explained by mistakes. But if we go to the set of them that are the hardest to explain, with a lot of people seeing the same thing with a lot of different kinds of instruments and repeating over days, and etc., then I just think those are pretty hard to explain as delusions and mistakes. I just can't do that. So now I got to go with one of these other categories. And the Earth organization being able to do these things, I think I know enough about what's been happening on Earth to know that that's really pretty crazy. That there could be these hidden organizations, like none of the nations on Earth would plausibly be doing this. And there'd be some other organization that has these amazing capabilities that they wouldn't use to make money with or to do other things. They're just doing it for this. That's just really hard for me to see. So now we're left with the hoax and the aliens. And the hoax is actually not so crazy. That is, say, the US government has done a lot of hoaxes in the past, say during World War II and after, where they faked things and lied about things. And there is a plausible story by which, if there's a Cold War between major powers who are thinking of doing first strikes on each other, one way to discourage a first strike by the other people against you is to make them think there might be a third party who would take an issue with it. And you don't have to make them feel very confident of it. You just have to make them feel a little more uncertain. There might be a third party who objects, and that would be worth billions of dollars of hoaxing to get that benefit. And that's not a crazy thing. The hardest part with that explanation is really that, say, the old Soviet Union, they also had a lot of UFO reports. could the US military have really conspired with people inside the Soviet Union to make a hoax for the rest of the world? It's hard to see, but I've still got to give it a high probability. Maybe the US hoax people got faked records to go into the Soviet archives of UFO reports that never happened. I don't know, maybe. So that's the hoax explanation. And then all you have left is the aliens explanation. And so I think what you got to do is say, okay, what's the best story we can come up with? And the main thing you have to realize is like, okay, like if there's UFOs and they're from aliens, they're pretty close, you know, probably in this galaxy, right? And that's a problem because if aliens were to spread that commonly across the universe, then like, why don't we see big stuff in the sky where some of them went and did stuff? So, and I have this grabby aliens analysis that does an analysis of when, if aliens appear independently in different places and times, roughly how often they do. And the analysis is they appear once per million galaxies. And so that means the nearest one is really far away. So then having aliens be really close would be pretty puzzling. And the way to overcome that puzzle was to have them have a common origin with us. They're no longer an independent draw in the universe. We and they came from the same place. That would be the way to understand how we can see this huge empty universe and nevertheless they're here. And the idea is this, okay, there's just one of them. And for the next million galaxies, there's just one of them near us. And they happen to come here, but everything else is empty and there aren't any other aliens for another million galaxies. That would be the way to make sense of that. And so then for them to have a common origin, panspermia works.